I don't know how many times I think I've said this over the years, but it's something that is well worth repeating. And that is, of course, regulations. We, as the UK public, but also in Parliament as well, have had over 40 years of not even having to have conversations about regulations for years. Now, many people say, oh, no, but we have had discussions about regulations. And I will go, okay, so have we had a discussion in Parliament within the last, 10 years about the intricate size of washers and the need for, rubber retention in them? No, because here's the thing regulations, and I have said this before as well, when you are trying to explain to people how important regulations are, they are boring. I have said this before. Trying to make regulations interesting and sound like really sexy is incredibly hard because some regulations, of course, we know we need understand it pretty easy. We've seen at the moment the lack of reductions in the safety equipment that chemical workers have to wear. I think that is something that should be discussed and talked about because it is something this government has done and reduced. You don't see it being brought up too much, but it has happened. I think it is something that is going to cause accidents and it is going to be causing a lot of damage to people who potentially do work in that chemical industry, especially if they're the safety regulations around the equipment that they have been reduced by this government, heavily, of course, pushed by one of the people who was massively for Brexit, who just happened to own one of the 6 UK chemical companies that was very, very pro Brexit. The rest of the chemical companies were like, no, actually, we like being in Europe. We want to stay here. However, massively pro Brexit, and of course, would take the opportunity to be, oh, well, all the UK chemical industries like me, this is just what it is. Wasn't the case at all. Unfortunately, that was one of the cases where you can heavily a good example of where businesses during the referendum should have spoken up a lot more. And unfortunately, they didn't. But regulation itself, big thing that we really should take more seriously. And it's not just this current government. I mean, this current government at the moment just completely disinterested in regulation by the fact that they have tried to have a massive bonfire of regulations on the often, and every time that they've built their bonfire of regulations, just as they are about to light the match, along comes someone, or in this case, Kimmy Badnock, with like a massive bucket of water and just chucks it all over them. And oh no, can't light your bonfire this time, guys. But this goes for all parties. I think every single party has a massive blind spot when it comes to talking about regulation because you have these things. Like I gave the washer example, hugely important to industrial regulation and things like that. But is anyone talking about that type of thing in Parliament? No, because what we should be doing is making sure that the regulatory bodies that we have are set up and that they take care of it. And then when they need legislation to be changed, they come forward and go, okay, this is legislation that needs changing. This is etc. Get on and pass it. But unfortunately, that's not been the case, primarily because of this current government have just kneecapped any of the regulatory bodies that we have and their abilities to be able to do that. But in the meantime, of course, as we've always said, the EU is a regulatory superpower. It continues constantly to move forward with all these regulations, constantly working every single time. So if you are a UK company, you have to follow these regulations. If you want to trade in Europe, you've got no choice. And of course, because we are not part of the EU anymore, we don't have a say in how these regulations are shaped or formed or anything like that. So if you're a UK company, you've got to follow them regardless. And the EU is continuing at pace, where you have at the moment the EU almost sprinting like a not 100-mile dash, but like 1,000-mile dash to get as much of its legislative agenda done before the upcoming European parliamentary elections. And yet, we've got an upcoming election, and the current Tory party is, or at least the current government is just going, yeah, maybe we'll do something about Rwanda. Maybe we'll do something about that. Maybe we'll do something here. So you can see where there is a widening gap. So this is something that we should at least begin to really take seriously. But the problem is, and I will always say it, the problem is, look, talking about regulations is really a deep and involving thing because you have to go into sort of very, very much exacting detail about why these regulations are so important. Bear in mind, I've said this before. I used to do GDPR training back in the day. It was a big thing that sort of we used to do. So when I was particular that particular marketing company, and we used to go out, we used to do training of these things. Really, really hard, difficult to try and get people to understand the importance of following GDPR rules. Very simple stuff that they had to do, but you just had to make sure that you knew it and you understand what to do. And if you, of course, you didn't follow these rules, then there were going to be consequences for breaking those rules. If you had found to be broken the rules by the Information Commissioner, if you had a breach and you didn't report it. So all this stuff and all these different types of regulations, vastly important. Brussels motoring ahead with its own regulations. Meanwhile, we've got our own government who has just been completely and absolutely stagnant about this. And maybe I hope Labour might change, hopefully. They too haven't talked too much about a regulatory agenda, except making sure that government bodies are properly funded and staffed. Beyond that, that's all we really know. But it's kind of important that we've got to do that, guys. And this is something all parties, I think, can be very, very, very much criticized for. The fact that they aren't really talking or taking regulations and how important this really is seriously. And it is very worrying because it's not just the current government, it's not just the current Labour Party. All the parties are exactly the same when it comes to this. They are not taking very seriously the implications this is going to have, especially on our international trade. So there are going to be big problems in the future down the line because of this. Will we be able to do stuff at speed later on? Yes. If the government gets its act together, it will be able to regulate this. Most of it, I'm going to have to say, is just looking at Europe and just copying and pasting what they've done into the UK statute book. I'm not going to lie. That's probably what's going to end up happening. But there you go. We'll see what happens and how this turns out. But honestly, at the moment, it's a continuing widening gap. It is going to create future problems. We will, of course, be talking about many of these future problems that it will create. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.